Let's talk to a CEO with firsthand knowledge of how AI is working throughout business, not just chatbots, to improve efficiency and productivity, and where these gains might be hidden. We're joined today by Ben Plummer. He's the CEO of Invisible Technologies, which is a company that combines humans and AI to improve processes and make businesses more efficient. This conversation is sponsored by Invisible Technologies. So Ben, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you again, and great to speak to you about where the AI field is heading.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It's great to be here.
So first question for you is, where's the ROI? Okay, because there's been this meme recently that companies have said we've spent, or really investors have said, there's been so much spending going into AI and nobody's making money from it. I doubt that's actually true. And I think you're probably closer to the return and the actual implementation of this technology, close to where the businesses find value from it. You're closer to that than I think anybody else. So where do you think the return is today, and where do you think this is heading?
Yeah, look, there's sort of two ways to look at this question. I think one, as you said, is on the sort of foundational model providers or the technology companies that are investing huge amounts of money in building and training these models. And I expect that's only going to continue, that the amount of money that goes into training these and building these foundational models is going to be in the billions, and that is only going to increase. And so there's a huge question there around the sort of long-term viability of that, the business models. But these technologies are so transformative that the ability to actually crack open AGI or something that even resembles something close to the power of that is so transformative for the economy that this is a real long game that they're playing here, that this is not something they would expect to see an ROI over the next 2 or 3 years. And so squinting at their revenue this year or next year, I think is sort of missing the broader potential of these technologies. Then when you go to the enterprise side, the sort of application of these technologies, we're just very early in the adoption of this. You know, most companies got caught flat-footed with the release of ChatGPT and the development of some of these technologies, and are really just sort of spinning up their own teams and allocating resources to it. And so you're starting to see the first frontier of companies that have been able to drastically transform the cost of service delivery or their operations. You know, I think there's cases of companies being able to streamline 600-700 people from their operations and deploy those to more customer-facing activities or other areas. And I think this is just the beginning of that sort of broader transformation. And what to avoid here is these sort of science project AI POCs. We've seen a lot of those over the last couple of years, which is companies just building technology for technology's sake. It's really important to focus on what actual business problem you're trying to solve and to work backwards from there.
So your view is that the value really is going to be unlocked in enterprise before consumer. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, look, I think consumers are already benefiting from these technologies. I mean, I can't even go to the fruit shop without someone talking to me about how they're using ChatGPT to do something here and there. I think the business model around that is sort of much more unclear, in the same way that, you know, sort of advertising really drove the sort of search business. But I think consumers are already benefiting from these technologies and were probably the first to adopt, and that enterprises are actually lagging a little bit in terms of how do they actually rewire the fabric of the organization using these technologies. We're very early in the adoption cycle of that. And companies just don't have the capabilities in-house to go after a really ambitious transformation agenda.
Right. And what's coming through here is that, I think it's so interesting. In the popular imagination, people say AI and everybody thinks ChatGPT, right? It's a chatbot moment. But what's coming through and what you're saying is, yes, chatbots are unlocking value for people and they're fun to use, but it's sort of going back to that original discussion around ChatGPT, which is that's a demo that sort of shows the capabilities, and the rest of the industry and in AI and beyond is starting to find ways to apply that technology in intriguing ways. So can you talk a little bit about how AI is starting to spread today beyond that chatbot use case?
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting that the release of ChatGPT sort of helped in some ways and hurt in others. I think the way it helped is really spurring a huge amount of imagination around what might be possible for these technologies, and really getting boards and executive teams thinking about what might be possible. the way it hurt is I think it sort of overrepresented how mature these technologies are and how ready they are for enterprise applications. And as you said, really shaped people's perception around what AI really is, which is only just sort of one form factor and imagination. And so to me, you sort of got to think about it much more holistically. And I think we're starting to see that with some of these multimodal interfaces where you can use video to sort of film the surrounding around you and start to interact and ask questions. And you're engaging in multiple modalities simultaneously, which is much more natural for humans. The same way you and I are going back and communicating and seeing each other and interacting with the world around each other. So I think these sort of multimodalities, I think the next frontier of that is going to be AI agents, agents that rather than just talk to you and go back and forth and chat, can actually go do work on your behalf, can take down a complex problem, plan out the work that it wants to go do, and execute beyond that. And ultimately, to me, and this is a bit of a sort of kickback to our name, Invisible Technologies, it's really about making the technology invisible, making it seamless and integrating it within our life. I don't know about you, but the proliferation of all these different apps and technologies over the last few years has only made things more complicated when the whole intent was to streamline things. And so I think these technologies have the ability to actually deliver on that promise and create seamless experiences for us across our personal and corporate life.
Okay, so two things. First, on the agent front, how close are we to seeing agents in practice? Because I keep hearing about agents, and every time someone cites an example of an agent to me, I go and check it out, and it's just like it's a ChatGPT wrapper. But we're talking about real agents here that actually are helpful. How far away are we from that?
Look, I think this is going to be something which is a gradual evolution. That we're sort of pretty close to having agents that can do discrete things, sort of one step, two step sort of planning exercises, and that you're going to need to build into that in terms of how much trust people build into these, how sophisticated they are in terms of planning multi-step things that have a sort of overall arc and then a number of sub-threads underneath them. That will take time. I think we're going to see that sort of develop over the next couple of years. Even if you just think about something relatively simple like planning a trip or a holiday or something like that, sort of starts with a very conceptual arc of where do you want to go, the type of experience you want to have, and then drills down into booking flights, booking Ubers, booking hotels, planning activities, and all of those individually are discrete actions that you could potentially delegate to an agent. What we haven't really seen is the ability to sort of hand that meta problem and have the AI go sort of oversee and execute that work, handle changes in the face of disruptions. Those types of things I think we're probably a couple of years away, but you'll start to see, I think, a couple of these sort of killer use cases that handle a more discrete part of that problem really, really well in the next few years.
And is that happening already? I mean, I know that you're working with companies to put AI into their operations, right? So is that agent based? Does it look more like the Apple Intelligence example where it sort of is aware of what's going on and gives smart suggestions? I mean, talk a little bit about how companies are integrating this into their operations today and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I'd say most of the use cases that end up people start with is much more on the efficiency side of things. It's like, okay, can we take something and reduce the cost of that by 50%, or can we take an employee and make them 50% more productive? And you're seeing that with co-pilots and all sorts of technologies. I don't think you sort of broadly speaking, you're seeing companies fundamentally rethink how their business might exist in a sort of AI first world. And I think we're going to start seeing the first round of startups that are sort of AI native that are really going after that from day one. And you'll see a real divergence in outcomes in sort of more traditional enterprises, those that actually cross this chasm and make that transformation, and that those that sit on the sidelines, I think, are really going to be left behind.
Right. And so, can you talk about a few, let's say, concrete examples that you've worked on that you can share exactly how this works for a company that's looking to integrate it?
Yeah. One of the sort of really interesting use cases that we've been going through recently is working with one of the sort of top tier investment managers, where they obviously are investing billions of dollars of capital around the world. They have a very sort of high talent, expensive cost base, and they're looking at saying, how can we improve the throughput of this sort of very profitable enterprise? And one of the ways we're looking at that is saying, look, they've got this huge body of knowledge that they've built up over decades of investing, all the investments they passed on. How do they take that knowledge and actually build a sort of super brain that consumes all that knowledge over decades of work and empowers a first year analyst to be able to access all that knowledge and analysis and apply it to a new deal or apply it to a new opportunity? And so you're not talking just here about efficiency gains. You're talking about a fairly transformative experience where you can basically take an inexperienced first year analyst and give them the power of someone with decades of experience and hundreds of deals under their belt, and scale that globally. And so this is a really interesting, exciting use case that's sort of been in progress over the last few months that's really transformative. This is not just 5-10% better here. This is like a fundamentally different way of trying to build a business like this.
Wait, so are they like speaking with, let's say, a knowledge bot that will sort of explain to them how to view the deal, or how does this look like in the actual interface?
Yeah, there's a couple of different modalities of this where the technology is capable of actually doing research, of analyzing a company and coming back with a point of view around what are the exposures, what are the sort of positives within that company. And then, yeah, there's one example where before going to an investment committee, each member of that investment committee actually has to engage with a bot and ask its questions and go through the verification process as part of their overall investment committee decision-making process. And
Wow.
this is a pretty fundamental shift in how companies are thinking about the application of these technologies.
What about a more boring example? I mean, are you guys working on like automation within back office? Because let me tell you, there's this quote that I was looking at today from Benedict Evans. I'm just going to pull it up. He goes, there's an interesting difference between people outside tech sneering at generative AI as chatbots that get things wrong and make crappy, stolen images, and people inside tech who are mostly working on using it to automate huge numbers of boring back office processes inside giant corporations for billions of dollars. So both Benedict and I were not using boring here as a pejorative. We're like actually using it as, and I've spoken with Matt Wood about this at AWS. It's a way to, this technology ends up taking over some of that sort of rote work and making room for more inventive work. So I'm curious if that's something that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I think this is honestly the most exciting opportunity here. Not just at a personal level, how do we shift people's work allocation from 20% sort of creativity, new ideas, and 80% execution the other way around? How can we spend 80% of our time on more creative thought processes and have AI sort of deliver the execution side of that? I think there's very similar parallels on the sort of enterprise and corporate side. I think one good example of a sort of more boring use case, if that's what you want to call it, is we worked with one of the largest e-commerce retailers that has over 100 million products in their catalog, and was suffering from really poor data quality around those items, how they were categorized, how they were tagged, the descriptions, that was really impacting their top line revenue. And so we went through a process of both using generative models to help classify and recategorize that information, but also importantly, humans in the loop to QA and oversee that, and cut what would have taken a team of 100 people 10 years to actually work their way through that backlog, cut that down to a number of months. And so that's why you're seeing these sort of transformative, exponential changes in the curve of what it takes to go do these things, that it just weren't even practical. It's by the time you got to the end of the 10 years, all of those items were probably obsolete and being replaced by other ones. And so you're really seeing these things that just were not possible even a couple of years ago.
And is that a multimodal project? Does like the model input the images and then sort of use text to describe them and things like that?
Yeah, that's right. We sort of, the initial versions of it were only text-based, but as you sort of start to think about that more broadly, there's, color categorization, there's size, there's all sorts of things you can do as you start thinking about the multiple modalities of information that's available.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked around this. We have this very powerful technology and we have people. And there is a challenge, right, in integrating human capital and technology because, it always sounds great in a PowerPoint, but the change management side is hard. And there's also fear among people about, okay, so I'm going to hand over, maybe this project to AI, maybe that it sort of explains some of the problems in the workplace today, but maybe that 10-year project was my paycheck for 10 years. So talk a little bit about this integration between human and AI and how you see that playing out.
Yeah, look, I think the best place to start is to go to the future, right? Go 10 years from now and imagine where we're likely to be. I think if you do that, it's pretty obvious that AI is coming in a pretty meaningful way and is not going to slow down and wait for anyone. And so the option to sort of sit on the sidelines and see this out, I think is a bad overarching strategy. And so then the question becomes how best to sort of integrate this and work through it. And what I'm seeing is, I think the best organizations are really starting to think about this in a much more integrated way. I love sort of coming up against organizations where the head of technology and the head of sort of people and talent are coming together and they're starting to think about these are just capabilities. And some of these capabilities come in artificial form and some of these come in human form. How do we think about them holistically and bring them together? And so there's sort of like an organizational structure and philosophy around capability acquisition versus sort of talent and technology. And then there's the platforms that enable you to sort of shift work between those. And that's an area that we've invested very heavily in Invisible around how do we promote a world which really does think about these two capabilities in a much more hybrid integrated way. And so we built a platform from the ground up that allows us to harness the best in AI and automation, but also supports, over 5,000 experts in every topic and domain that you can imagine. So you can mix and match those capabilities very fluently.
Yeah. So how do those experts then integrate with the platform?
Yeah, so we sort of manage the end-to-end life cycle of finding those people, breaking down their skills and capabilities, think about them sort of like badges and certifications of all the different things that you could go do, and then have, a matching algorithm that's not too dissimilar to an Uber or something like that, that's sort of saying, okay, we need this process or this piece of work needs these type of skill sets, who's available, and people can basically opt in and do that piece of work. They're trained and certified on that piece of work. We manage that end-to-end process with quality control and oversight all on our platform.
Oh, that's cool. I'm curious, could you see AI taking over like the role of an expert in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the way I
Or
sort of
let
think.
me say taking on, right? Not replacing, but saying, hey, like if we had these 5,000 experts, maybe now we can have 20,000 if we hire quote unquote 15,000 AI.
Yeah, look, you're already start. I think we're early in it, but you're already starting to see this where I think about it like a glide path, right? Where in the early days you might have the humans doing 100% of the work, and then over time you start to have the model maybe suggest what the person might want to pick or come up with ideas in a sort of co-pilot fashion. And so you've sort of got the human in the driver's seat, the AI being there as a sort of an assist. And then you move to the next phase where you've probably put the AI in the driver's seat, and there's still some level of human oversight that's checking that's quality controlling, that handling the more sort of extreme circumstances. And then at some point you get to a point where you're confident enough in the AI and you're able to move the human completely out and move them onto other more complicated or more messy activities. And that glide path is just going to sort of basically work its way through every process. And there's things that are easier to move through that process, and then others that will be take longer to fall. But I think ultimately everything is going to follow some version of that trajectory.
This reminds me a lot of what I heard within Amazon because they've been on the automation path for more than a decade, right? And it's that people who used to be keying in information, now they become auditors. And people that used to be, moving something from column A to column B, instead of doing that, they become tastemakers. And people who eventually, in a company that's functional and wants to compete, who eventually have AI take their work, they go on to the next inventive process and are able to help the company reinvent and attack new markets. And the companies that do that well, it seems like they're the ones that are going to have the upper hand in the economy. The companies that don't do it well will maybe be more profitable for a while, but then ultimately, succumb to competitive pressure.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. Like I think this is much less about replacing humans and just sort of repurposing our effort towards things that we're uniquely capable of doing. This sort of invention and creative process and actually coming up with new ideas or novel solutions to problems and stop us being sort of held down by boring, sort of monotonous rote work, which honestly machines are much better at doing than we are.
Now, Ben, let me ask you this. I talked about Amazon in the previous question, right? They've been implementing automation since 2015. By the way, they've grown their workforce by hundreds of thousands since. So, in that case, at least, it doesn't look like AI is taking jobs. But anyway, so we've been having years and years of AI implementation, automation implementation, the most impressive technology that we can invent, putting it into the workplace. Yet, if you think about the lift on productivity that we've seen from economists studying this stuff, they say it's been relatively muted. I still can't fully wrap my head around the fact that productivity remains not static, but slowly increasing, while this technology that blows our minds is available to us for free or low cost and then being implemented in the workplace. What's your thought on that front?
Yeah, look, I think there's lots of different theses around what's going on here. I think a big part of this is the complexity and switching costs that I mentioned earlier, the proliferation of all these different systems. It's the SaaS tool for this, the SaaS tool for this, the SaaS tool for that. Each one, in theory, is sort of solving some specific problem and meant to streamline processes, whether it's for reviews or payroll or Salesforce or whatever system that each person needs to use. But ultimately, the work of sort of navigating between those and shifting between them ends up falling back on the enterprise. And so I think a lot of the proliferation of these technologies has added this huge tax of complexity and switching costs that the technology is not yet streamlined, that we haven't actually seen a shift from increasing complexity down into actual streamlining when you look at what a person's day-to-day work looks like. And that switching cost ends up being a huge tax when you look at what people spend their time doing. And I think the next wave of AI transformation really needs to cut that out, to give you sort of a single point of interface, to really sort of think about how does it wrap around you as an individual or you as a professional to supercharge you and actually make your life easier.
And what might the interface look like if we were to get there? Like, what does that actually look like in practice? Because you still have these, like you're talking about, very thorny change management problems, human capital issues. So what if you got a chance to dream a little bit, and we'll allow you the space here? What does that look like?
Yeah, look, I think the most compelling visions for sort of modality are these sort of omnipresent, sort of over your shoulder AI assistants that are always there, whether that's sort of through vision and some of the goggles and some of these ideas of sort of AR and VR, or just a co-pilot that's sort of sitting on your computer the whole time. It's interesting to sort of go back to Clippy and some of these early visions of what AI might have been. That's constantly watching and is there right when you need it. I think that the sort of switching cost now is to pause whatever you're doing and go type something into GPT or type something into Claude. And that inherently is still a piece of friction versus something that's sitting over your shoulder and saying, oh, I know what you're about to do. I've been watching
Yeah.
what, you're about to write an email. You're most likely going to be writing about this thing. Here's some suggestions. Is that right? And it's sort of ever present there and just gently suggesting, nudging, taking work off you, coming back and saying, hey, I thought you might be interested in this, and has enough contextual awareness that that is sort of seamless and delivered just at the moment that you need it. It's been a couple of hours. You're probably about to look for a coffee shop. Here's one around the corner. And that there's no sort of friction in the process of actually requesting and collecting that information. I think it looks like that. I think that it is sort of always on, always there, building up a better understanding of you and the context around you, and then delivering really relevant, just-in-time sort of information or doing work on your behalf before you even ask for it.
Yeah. And Ben, there's an important variable that I've left out the whole conversation, which is the state of the labor market, right? I mean, in the US here, we're almost at full employment and unemployment's exceptionally low. And across the globe, it seems like the access to jobs, not everywhere, but in many places, is about as good as it's ever been. And I think that means companies probably, can benefit tremendously from gaining technology that will increase the average employee's productivity and adaptiveness and subject matter expertise in a way that might be difficult to hire for at this moment. Am I reading that right, or is that completely off?
No, I think that's right. There's sort of two things going on simultaneously. One is I think we've seen huge shifts in the global talent markets, both sort of skills and high quality talent has become much more global than I think companies have historically thought about it. There's a lot more people that are moving into sort of fractional or freelance work, and that companies are still thinking about, hiring full-time employees within 20 miles of their office or whatever is missing out on an increasingly huge percentage of the overall talent pool. And so the companies that are rethinking their talent strategy and how they access talent are getting really significant advantages there. And then the second is being able to leverage these AI technologies to really democratize knowledge and expertise. The ability, even if you go back to that investment case, the ability to bring in a relatively junior, untrained staff member and wrap them in an Iron Man suit that gives them the expertise and knowledge of, a career-long professional is really extraordinary. And you're seeing that in sort of high talent industries like this, but also dealing with the sort of aging knowledge transfer of call centers, all sorts of expertise that are sort of moving out of the workforce that companies don't know how to replace. These technologies provide finally a solution to be able to harness and deploy that knowledge throughout their workforce.
Okay, last question for you. We focus on big technology on this channel a lot, but what about smaller companies? I mean, it seems like if done right, this technology can help a small company spin up pretty quickly and reduce some of the weight that's needed effectively to get going and start competing against bigger guys. What do you think about that?
This is probably my most exciting and compelling idea around the real power of these technologies. That I think you would have heard Sam Altman talk about the one person unicorn. And so while
Yeah.
that might be a little far fetched, I do think directionally this is very right. That these technologies and companies like Invisible will enable you to build really powerful global companies that are able to compete with others that have, thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees very, very quickly, to be more agile, to be more nimble, and to operate with just a very high density core set of talent that's sort of overseeing and steering the organization, but is enabled by hundreds of thousands of AI agents that are basically doing the work, and they can do so very quickly. And you've sort of broken the paradigm that sort of bigger companies have more employees and they're larger in size. I think effectively that will become a liability, that it sort of makes you less agile, makes you less able to adapt to changing circumstances than these AI technologies will.
Yeah. And well, and as a one person company, I can tell you, I'm looking forward to the day where we can have AI that helps us do a lot more with much less. So
Exactly right.
it's music to my ears. All right, Ben, if people want to hear more about Invisible Technologies, where can they find more about the company?
Yes, so just go to invisible.co. It's the easiest way to get us online. Would love to help people transform their operations. We work with all sorts of companies, from the biggest companies in the world all the way down to small to medium enterprises. And so would love to help companies on their AI journey and just streamline and scale their business operations.
Ben Plummer, CEO of Invisible Technologies. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We'll have another interview up on the channel shortly, and we'll see you next time. Take care.